Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Invasion from this year. Another show called Invasion. There's always this like alien-esh like thing that is to eventually be dropped on us at some point in time. And so I guess this just so happens to be one of them. Or just something that I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on. Because in this first pilot episode, we just get to know a lot of the characters, and then there's to be mystery that follows. So, going into this show, we have one part of it, so it's like a small part of it that is to actually, in this first pilot episode, be done in Japanese. Supposedly, this is an Apple TV show, but you could also go into another app that I've been using fairly reliably that you can watch a number of content for free called TV Crush, and you should be able easily be able to watch this show with subtitles without having to pay for certain apps, unless you're just conveniently watching a lot of stuff on there anyways, probably like the Jason Momoa show called C or some other kind of things that it seems Apple TV is starting to really start to churn out some interesting content that it seems that a lot of people are interested in for whatever reason. But it's really just not popping off like Stars is, but whatever, eventually get there. So eventually, when they realize that it's like, well, hey, how about we just go and just take all this content and just put it onto Netflix? Because, anyways, or any other kind of Hulu or something. Because I don't know about Apple TV. We'll figure that out. So, but I thought this show was interesting. I thought there was enough like hook here to get you invested in all the characters that they focused upon this episode and gave us a little goofy mystery kind of ordeal in this episode where it's like, okay, this is strange. So it seems that the main people that they are to be focusing on in this episode, I'll kind of lay you out the land of things. So we have a sheriff called Jim Bell Tyson who is to be living out his last day as sheriff, and then he is going to retire. The sheriff is to seemingly have a time of which where he's really just trying to find the real legitimate purpose or the real legitimate like question of like, what is he really doing here? Like, where is his life going to, and what could be like his mark that he is to leave on the world? Weirdly, we have this sheriff that has this kind of like almost midlife crisis or something like that towards his retirement, to just be like, hey, like, now that I am not sheriff, like what was the real, like, he's kind of looking at his whole life as just like, what was the big thing that came out of all this? So we also have a an astronaut named Hinata, who is to seemingly go off into space. So there's a whole story about that where it's kind of like her last days on Earth, because she's going to go supposedly off to Mars. And so like there's a whole story about that. We also focus on the Malik family, and eventually I'll get more into them with their spoilers and stuff like that. And so yeah, that's kind of like where the seemingly main focus is upon this episode and how we play things out. So I think that's all that I wanted to say about the spoiler. So in the first episode, they don't actually give you they don't actually like drop it on you of what this is. They kind of leave it as a mystery kind of thing to just make you enticed to go and watch other episodes. Like, it seems you get a little blip of something, or you get a little thing where you're just like, wait a minute, what was that? Like, it kind of, that's what it really feels at the very tail end of her, at the very end of this. they give you like a little blur or a little something, and then you're like, what the was that? And then you're like, okay, I guess you just need to watch other episodes to eventually figure it out, or eventually get to a point where they just chuck it all out to you. Um, but yeah, but this episode just eventually does get to the, like, it's kind of like in baseball, it's like a pitcher kind of thing where they give you this wind up, and then eventually they give you this pitch to give you this big moment, and then eventually they might go on to an even bigger moment, just like, oh wow, okay, that's interesting. But they don't. But everything is mystery. Everything is to just be like, but what's really going on in the show? Is kind of what you're really thinking. You're like, but what's really going on? I'm so confused. Like, feed me, Seymour, feed me something. But like, that's the point of you having seemingly 3 to 4 episodes to eventually figure this out. Um, I would love it if they just left us in the dark consistently. Just bizarrely just kept giving like us stories about certain people and people and people, and they're all having to just endure this weird goofy event that doesn't seem to really like drop it in on us. It just is like, hey, just leave it more and more vague. So like in another episode we just focus on all these other people, and we keep doing that, and like it'll just tick people off to just be like, what's going on in the show? Because that's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting for us to, like, every single episode it completely shifts into different people and different focuses, and they never go back to what happened in the first episode to make us desperately just like, but I wanted to know what happened with those people. What's going on? So with that said, I think for spoilers, I'm probably going to have to take certain stories and focus on them to kind of knock things out, so I can kind of finish them up. Because it'll be a lot easier that way rather than separating all bits and pieces of these stories. Because I also like things to easily just be one fell swoop of a thing that I can do, which is way easier than having to go in and do like, oh, in the first 1 minute of this episode they had this story, and but wait, I'll go back to that 30 minutes down the line somewhere. When I'm so enthralled in one part of the show. So that's how I like doing when they have a lot of, like, a ton of stories going all on in one episode anyways. That's how I like to do it. So hopefully people like that kind of approach, because I like completional things. It's better for me. I like it that way. So with that said, let's go into, because I've already told you, I've already let you know where you can go and see this show that has subtitles, because that was a problem. I went to like a certain app that I've been using normally to just find anything, and there wasn't subtitles there. It wasn't knowing what was going on in the not to be unsensitive here, but the Japanese story that had subtitles going through. I was like, oh, I don't have subtitles. What the heck? I want to know what's going on. So let's know what is going on. Let's go out of our way to say that it's spoiler time. So let's go into this. It's that customary time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil the show. So right out of the gate, I think I really would. I think I want to cover probably gonna have to cover the Hinata story, because I think out of all the stories, that kind of seems to be short enough to kind of cover compared to all the others. It seems like the Malik story, the Malik family story, has a lot going on. And then I think after Hinata, I'm going to cover the Jim Bell Tyson story, which is the sheriff's story. So we'll kind of knock these down in certain kind of ways, because I think there's certain stories that are better than others, and so I'm going to save them for last. So let's go into this. So Hinata is to wake up in bed seemingly with no clothes on, mentioning that she knows she hates this, but she loves whoever is in the shower. So Hinata is to go and put this star, this glow in the dark star, on this person's ceiling. And so just to kind of give her a reminder that like she's there for whoever this lover is. So Hinata is to eventually go on to get a cab, and so immediately this guy is to ask Hinata, it's like, well, what is the one thing that you're going to miss? And Hinata, I think, ends up saying uh, like the ground or some kind of goofy thing, because Hinata is going to, of course, go off into Mars, and so she's, of course, like they're kind of mentioning the fact that when eventually she's going to go and do this press conference with NASA, or in Japan, it's JASA or JASA, JASA, JASA. I don't know the NASA Japanese equivalent of how they pronounce that, so I apologize. I would just call it NASA because I'm ignorant. So, but I'm just being honest. Uh, so Hinata is going and doing this speech about how they're going to Mars and how because of that long flight travel, there might be some body issues that might go along with having that long stretch of flight and whatever. So while Hinata is going and doing this speech, there is to be seemingly these two technicians going and talking things out. We have, I think, Yamato, who is to, of course, be one of the technicians talking to this one guy, who is to eventually mention how Hinata had gone out with some guy, and he kind of questions the fact that she went out with this guy because, like, I'm sorry, that's not really a guy that I would say, like, just bang it out before she ends up going off to space because the sex probably isn't that good. And Yamata is like, well, how would you even know? Like, and so Himata goes onto this guy's screen and realizing that he's effing around and that he's kind of like doing some kind of game or something like that. So this girl is to just kind of go and basically play his game for him and tell him how he wins. And so the guy's like, ah, you're such an a-hole. So eventually Yamahato goes on into the rocket because evidently they are testing certain kind of things on the rocket where it seems like they're testing certain camera screens. And so Yamahato is talking to Hinata, and so we end up having them kind of exchanging dialogue back and forth where Hinata is to mention it's like, oh yeah, they had to send a girl to do this job. Like they sent the right person. We also have Hinata who's talking to this girl and mentioning like, have I seen you before? And the girl's like, no, kind of playing around with something, which eventually we'll figure out sometime at the later part of this episode what that actually means. So eventually they are to test these screens and or test these kind of cameras, and so eventually they're to test if they can kind of communicate well, and they can, if they can see kind of screens well, and they can, so on and so forth, just kind of testing some diagnostical things. And so everything is seemingly to work, and so eventually we end up having supposedly this girl asking Hinata, like, what is the one thing that you're going to miss when you leave? And she is to mention the sunrise. So eventually she goes off and leaves. And so Hinata is to, of course, go on and launch and go into outer space, and countdown works out successfully. The ship goes well. Everything is to be seemingly going out into space. Everything works. So all of a sudden, Hinata is going with her astronauts, kind of floating into the ship, and they're just kind of checking on things. All of a sudden, their ship ends up having a huge hole inside their ship, and all the astronauts end up getting sucked out of it and end up getting killed. And all you see is the ring that is just kind of floating like in the air. And I'm just like, oh my god, what the heck happened? What's going on? Oh my god, what? So now, because that's just the way that story ends for whatever reason. So now let's focus on the sheriff's story. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, what? What happened? Come on, tell me. And I'm like, I can't because I don't know the information. Eventually we'll figure out in other episodes. Or probably more likely someone's going to spoil this for me, which that's bound to happen because I could care less. I don't care about spoilers. Like, I don't care anymore. I know that a lot of people kind of quickly watch um, stuff quicker than I do. Plus, also, like, if anybody has a theory craft of kind of what's going on in the episodes, I like to do that too, where I'm just like, maybe maybe it's not a real legitimate kind of, like, maybe there was just some accident that happened. Maybe there was something that they were testing and like something malfunctioned. Because that's, I'm sure, what's going to happen is immediately they're going to get called to eventually say, hey, what the heck happened? But I guess I can really finish up that story, though, with Yamato eventually going home and is to eventually go and undress and go to get some sleep, to all of a sudden have us find out that that glow-in-the-dark star was actually on her ceiling, and that's what the whole thing was to represent, that Yamato was actually with Hinata on her last days. So it's like, okay, so these girls were actually a couple together, like they just didn't want to tell anybody about it, or they just wanted to keep it a secret for whatever reason. So I'm like, okay, that's really cool. I like that. Because you never actually see the person that she's with, and there's speculation that she slept with some guy, but actually she ended up sleeping with some girl, which is like, okay, that's cool. Like, I like that story. So luckily I finished that part because I almost forgot. So now let's get into the sheriff's story. So the sheriff is to seemingly go off for seemingly his final day after 45 years of sheriff service, or just policing altogether, because I wouldn't think he'd be sheriff for 45 years. That seems like man, this guy just got this title and just continued to just be sheriff because nobody else evidently wanted to. So, like, he must have been like in his like early teens when he got that sheriff position. You know what I'm saying? Like, he must have just got it at the perfect time. Anyways, so uh Sheriff Jim Bell Tyson is to seemingly be getting like a normal breakfast and stuff like that, and so his wife is to pretty much tell him, it's like, well, hey, like, make sure that you're make sure that you're gonna like take care of yourself today. Because yeah, like, definitely he's gonna try to be as safe as possible today because he's going off to retirement. So it's like, yeah, definitely don't go and get a bullet hole in your last day. So, and she's like talking about insurance and whatever. So, so the sheriff goes off and is to make it into office. Make it into his office where they're like scraping his name off his like door, and he's like, "Dude, I'm not even cold yet. Like, come on, like, you don't have to erase the name just yet. Like, come on." So eventually Jim Bell is going to his office and he has to talk to his deputy, which I am going to now go and check what her name actually is. Deputy Grady. Dang, woman. Got a pretty nice profile picture on IMDb for whatever reason. Man. But she's actually a really attractive woman when you actually look at her in the show. So, both Jim Bell and Deputy Grady are going on to this one farmer's place because evidently a guy, I think his name is Ben Shelton, is to eventually complain that some cousins of his had stolen his truck. And Jim is like, well, are you sure about this? Like, Sheriff is just like, are you sure? Like, are you sure it's your cousins? And so Ben is kind of complaining how, like, kind of Jim is just kind of just like, hey man, like, you know what, before, like, you would have gone and sent the whole county or whatever to go and like find my truck. Like, why are you just kind of like pushing your feet on this now? And Jim is like, like, well, uh, like, I'll go and I'll find your truck. Because eventually, when we get further and further onto this story, like, it just becomes more and more interesting. Uh, why Jim is just kind of like, this is it? Like, this is like gonna really be what my day is to be consumed by? This sucks. So Jim Bell eventually is to go with Deputy Grady and is to eventually go and find this truck. And it's in the middle of some cornfield where all of a sudden there's to be this massive hole that is to be in this cornfield, weirdly, as if like some alien ship like might have gone down or something like that. So they end up going to the truck, and they end up finding out that there is like a day old bong in there, and so on and so forth. And it seems like everything is gone, like, or like everything is there besides the people. Like their wallet is weirdly in the truck, like as if like they had gotten caught by somebody, and so they had to like quickly run off. And that's, I think, what Deputy's like thought process was, is like, and plus this truck is like beat to heck, and I don't know if it was meant to be that way or whatever, but still. So the sheriff goes into the truck, and so all of a sudden there's weirdly this like massive swarm of like locusts that all of a sudden come from some part of the sky and eventually start like smacking into this truck. And so like the sheriff is getting like pelted with these locusts because the windshield is broken and any of the glass part of this like truck is broken, so he's getting freaking pelted with these things. And so the deputy is screaming for the sheriff, and so the sheriff gets down into the ground, and so both the sheriff and deputy are just kind of just like holding over their heads to just be like, God, what the was that? To all of a sudden realize that it was to be locusts for whatever reason. And it's like, what is this, like the end of days? Like, is it gonna get some like biblical proportions going on in here? Like, is all of a sudden we're gonna like see like freaking uh uh some kind of like signs of apocalypse or something happening? What's going on here? I'm so confused. Is it space? Is it like, is it an alien invasion? Is it God coming down and smiting some people? What's going on here? It's so like, maybe God is in some part of space and he's coming down to just smite people. Who knows? Somebody would probably know if they watch this show, because I'm sure they probably have. Um, Let me know in the comments below. Leave it extremely vague, but just let me know if there is an episode yet where it seems we come up with answers. See, just have a yes or no thing to that. Like say the question in the comment, because I'll probably forget. And then have a yes or no if you've seen the show. If you've never seen the show before, then answer it anyways, because it doesn't really matter. Like, you could say what episode they come up with answers, and then eventually I'll be like, I don't feel like that will be an actual spoiler. I'll just be like, oh, okay, but then don't like over explain it. Just be like, oh, in episode 4 they come up with answers. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I'll watch it until that. Or if it's still just like, no, just like they just want to F with people, then I'll be like, oh, okay, so this will be an interesting show regardless. Because it's only 4 episodes in so far, I believe. So let's go into this. So Sheriff Jim Bell is to all of a sudden start driving away from this whole Barnes situation. And so now he is to go and find these two missing people. And so eventually Sheriff Jim Bell ends up going to a guy named Daniel Myers, who's basically be a drug dealer. And so the sheriff is to end up asking this guy, it's like, well, hey, like, these guys probably do owe you money because it seems like they have a thing of weed or something like that, and it seems like they have been like kind of traveling around your circles. So, like, where are they? Like, they're probably with you. They probably owe you money. Like, come clean. And so Daniel Myers is kind of just giving them nothing. If anything, he's just insulting them by calling them like Sheriff Alzheimer's and some kind of racial slur for Deputy Grady, which I'm not going to say because that's awful. So Daniel Myers is to go and say to this sheriff, it's like, well, you know what? Like, when my father was having to deal with you, like, he never really understood you. He never really understood, like, why would you make such a fuss to come on down here with your sirens and your whatever, and, like, he never really understood that. He never understood, like, what you're doing. Um, so the sheriff is just to realize that he's not going to get any answers with Daniel Myers, and so he eventually just kind of, like, he goes off to eventually go and find a girl, um, and asks her some information about these guys, whether or not that she was to see them. And so she ends up going and slapping on her weird star-like jacket, which I thought was like, man, this jacket looks really cool. Like, I was like, man, I'm digging the jacket that this girl's wearing for whatever reason. So, but this girl's to mention that basically the only thing that these guys were really meant to do was to eventually just disappear. Like, there was nothing meaningful for these guys. And so we end up having the sheriff, after talking to this girl, he ends up walking out, and he ends up just like pausing and like stopping. And so the deputy's like, Sheriff, are you okay? And so the sheriff eventually ends up getting into the car, and the deputy ends up like driving him to, I guess, the office to just kind of wrap things up for the day. And so the deputy is to ask sheriff, it's like, hey, you know what? Like, I never really asked anything of you before or whatever, but like, I think like this time around it like causes for me to finally ask. It's like what's up? Like, what's going on? Like, what's wrong with you? And so Sheriff Jim or Sheriff Jim Bell eventually tells his story that Jim Bell was at one point like wanting to search for meaning, like why he ended up because supposedly he thought, because evidently he's a religious person, you can tell that by when the sheriff is going into the office, he's listening to like a preacher preach about God and stuff like that. He's a very religious person. That kind of comes obvious with his radio choice. And so Jim Bell was talking about how like God would normally like choose people to do something. And like Jim Bell thought that him getting the badge meant that he was like chosen to be sheriff, and that eventually there was a reason why he had to have gone and done that. So Sheriff mentions that there was one time that some girl had gone missing, and that Jim Bell thought at that one time that some girl had gone missing, that would be the one case where Jim Bell will be like, oh my god, like, this is going to be the one big case where I'm going to be remembered forever by. And, like, this is going to be the one thing that is going to give me a huge amount of meaning. to eventually have Jim Bell eventually find this girl quite easily and just figure out that she was to just be, because I think she was to be lost at some amusement park. And so Jim Bell thought that this was going to be the big case, that eventually they were going to throw a parade for this girl, and that Jim Bell was going to get an award, and all of this stuff was just kind of compiling into his brain. But then all of a sudden, what ends up happening is that this girl was to eventually go with her dad after being found, got some ice cream, and then eventually, as they were to head home, they get into a car accident, and this girl ends up going flying through this windshield. No parade, no medal, no nothing. So, like, Sheriff Bell is just to realize that, like, his life as him being under this badge has never had any meaning and no purpose until the last minute he was to be the sheriff. That this case is to be so unique and so interesting, but there's nothing that Jim Bell can do because he's retiring, because he's done. And so, like, Jim Bell is to say at the very last minute, God was to give me this, and there's nothing I can do. So, Jim Bell is to go off and have this kind of party be thrown for him. He ends up having this key to the city given to him because of his 45 years of service. And he ends up giving this plaque to him, or he ends up getting a plaque given to him where he is to supposedly get a day in his honor of his retirement. And so Jim is to start thanking people, and is, of course, thank his wife, to mention that, like, retirement might be an eternity with her, and so on and so forth, just to make jokes. So Jim Bell is eventually go on, and eventually he is to start reading this plaque, where eventually it's to mention his 45 years of service, that eventually he had done his duty and had purpose and had meaning. And so all of a sudden, weirdly, Jim Bell, like, stops what he's doing and then just starts walking off. And people are like, okay, like, all right, so let's, like, continue with the party until eventually he comes back. So, I don't know. So, Jim Bell goes back out to that cornfield, and so Jim Bell is just to, like, look up at the heavens and tell God, like, what is this? Like, give me something. What is this? What was I here for? Show me what this is. So all of a sudden, weirdly, we start having this, like, this little place that this little weird circle that Jim is to be in. All of a sudden, it's, like, starting to slowly but surely move a little bit, and he's thinking, like, what are all these two guys in the sand somewhere? Let me go and scrape this out to maybe see if I can find Cal or Chet or whoever these guys are. And he doesn't find them. And so he's just like, what? And then so all of a sudden, there's to be something that smacks Jim Bell, I guess right in the neck or somewhere in his body. I couldn't really see. And he just falls over, and I'm assuming dies. And I'm like, what the heck was that? Like, we end up seeing some, like, black thing, like, seemingly pop from this little sand dune-like thing. And then it vanishes. And then all of a sudden in the sky, we see this, like, weird shape of a thing that all of a sudden is to move around. And so I'm like, well, is that a spaceship that is seemingly cloaked? Or invisible, or whatever? It's like the Wonder Woman, like, plane? What's going on? Like, I thought I saw something, but I wasn't sure. So that's all that happens with that story. And now we have to go into the Malik family, because if we were getting some weird stuff in either one of these stories, now let's go into the Malik family. So the Malik family are to start out their day with really just having Nishada. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that somewhere right. Anisha is. I'm gonna go with Anisha. So Nisha is to go and get up and eventually start to get her kids ready for school and whatever. And so eventually they're like, well, hey, you know what? Who isn't up? So both the kids go running into Dad's bedroom and just trying to wake him up. And so uh, Ahmed is, of course, to be playing around with his kids. So Ahmed is to, of course, seemingly after this, he ends up going off to work. I think Anisha is to just be a stay-at-home mother. So eventually, what ends up happening is that uh, Emily Muhammad is to be a guy that ends up like pitching stuff to people. Like if someone was to like maybe he pitches like commercials to people. Maybe he pitches certain kind of like business ideas to people and stuff like that. Like he must be one of these guys that kind of goes and is to give like $1 million ideas to certain kind of things and whatever. Like it seems like he's trying to like I don't know exactly what his job is because it doesn't really feel all that uh like cemented and really understanding. So the next thing that eventually we are to see is we have Anisha's kids who go off to school, and so what ends up happening at this point is that it seems like they are to do this one like part in this school where all of a sudden like these kids are all going into band, and so they're all doing their instruments and like they're kind of sounding wah 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 because that's what happens when a lot of people end up starting band. They're just kind of like I can't get quite the pitch right, and so it kind of takes like it takes a while to eventually start to get certain things correct. So eventually we have it to where all of a sudden, weirdly, all these kids in this entire class all of a sudden get nosebleeds at the same time, and they're dripping blood just through their nose, nowhere else. It's not like they're bleeding from the eyes, then bleeding from the ears, bleeding from their mouths, and like it's not like the one movie that I just watched called uh, the Shadow of the Moon or something like that. That kind of has that kind of thing going on with it weirdly for some goofy reason. Because eventually people are to lose their bits and pieces of their brain coming out of their body places that it looks just like blood. They're losing their brain weirdly. Strange. Anyways, but pushing on. So it seems that the girl of this family had her nose bleeding, but weirdly the son didn't. And so immediately we have Anisha who ends up going to this school, and I guess every one of these kids all had nosebleeds, to where eventually Anisha is to go to this one uh, guy who I think is to eventually be. Uh, let me try to get this right here. They end up going to some administrator who is to basically just say, well, we're just kind of sending everybody home because we're not sure what the heck is even happening. So, like, just for safety reasons, we're going to let everybody just kind of stay home for the rest of the day because we're just kind of worried that there might be some kind of asbestos or lead poisoning or something like that that might cause this bleeding. So, we're going to send everybody home. So Anisha is to go and call her husband to eventually just getting an answering machine, because she's like, well, honey, like, I know that you're probably doing some pitch, or I know that you're busy, but like, call me whenever you can. So evidently Ahmed doesn't check his messages. So eventually Anisha is to eventually take their kids to the doctor, and it is to be some Dr. Lockhart, I believe. So we end up finding out that Anisha seems to have some medical experience, but I guess she ended up giving up whatever her practice was, or whichever. So maybe if the world goes to crap and all of a sudden has an alien invasion, I guess we're really going to need Anisha on our side because she's a doctor. So luckily we have that, where like Anisha, like if something goes down, we might have Anisha that we don't know exactly like how much like skill that she probably has as a doctor. That's kind of so interesting. So because I was like, yeah, she's a doctor, yeah. So because eventually we have Dr. Lockhart, um, who is to tell Anisha that evidently Anisha had decided to run certain kind of tests while they're in while they're in the car. She evidently ran some like tests to just kind of find out or figure out like what is going on with her kids. And so Dr. Lockhart is like, "You seriously ran those tests like in the car?" And she's like, "Yeah, because I was like a doctor and I got certain studies at certain places." And so she ends up asking where this doctor had ended up getting his studies from, and he's like, "Oh, I went to this place." So eventually, if I were Dr. Lockhart, I'd be like, why are you even here? Because Dr. Lockhart basically just says, well, like, there isn't anything that we can come up with yet, so just kind of like, just go home and drink plenty of fluids, and like there's not much that I can come up with right now. Just kind of go home. So eventually, all of them go home. They go, and eventually they're like sitting and like watching a movie and so on and so forth. So eventually what ends up happening is that eventually while they're going and watching this movie, all of a sudden we have, I think, the son of this group. I'm not quite sure if the name is to be quite accurate, because there's a lot of kids in this movie, or a lot of kids in this first episode. So I could be saying, oh yeah, it's definitely this person. So I want to say it's Luke and Sarah, but I'm not 100% sure. Um, so yeah, let's say it's Luke and Sarah because they have the same name as Anisha. So Luke is to evidently just be like concerned of why his nose wasn't bleeding compared to everyone else's, and so the doctor ends up just like when they were at the doctor is like, well, you're just bizarrely lucky, kid, for whatever reason. Maybe the aliens are gonna take you. They're gonna suck you into their ship because you're unique. You're the golden child. Because more than likely, probably the only people that they want are probably children. They probably are gonna wipe out all the adults, and they probably only want the children for whatever goofy reason. So all of a sudden, like Anisha is to again try and call Ahmed to kind of see like where he's at, because eventually Luke is to have on his tablet or his iPad, or I'm sure it's an iPad because this show probably has some money, right? They don't have like the money that I that I would have to just buy a tablet. No, they probably have like an iPad Cloud that just came out this year or like 5 minutes ago, and they probably have it to use on this show. So Luke is to eventually showcase that their father weirdly is in a location that doesn't actually quite make sense for him to be at. So Anisha is to go and find this location, and so eventually she is to go and look into this house to eventually find out that seemingly Ahmed is having an affair with another woman. And I'm like, oh my god, this is like an invasion story and we're having an affair going on? Like an alien invasion story that is going to pop off and the world's going to end and like Ahmed is having an affair? Man, is this couple going to get really just shooken up? So we end up finding out because Anisha ends up going and finding out this address of this woman, and then eventually finds out that it's some girl named Amanda Hornsby. Hornsby. Uh, like, so it's almost sound like horny. But anyways, so weirdly, so Anisha goes and like Instagrams this girl and is to all of a sudden go and find out that she is a cook. She likes specific kinds of recipes. So Amanda hearts them for some weird reason. I couldn't figure out why until eventually Ahmed walks in and I'm like, oh my god, here is just the real. Here is some just like diabolical that like Anisha just plops down. So Ahmed ends up walking home and is to mention all this stuff about his job, how everything is just like, man, we just had this one deal and it worked out so well, and like, yeah, like, yeah, yeah, it was going just, man, it was just like, man, it was going this guy is so enthralled about his work, and I'm just waiting for the moment where this woman is just gonna slap him with something. So Anisha is to just be like, well, hey, like, I have this like late night meal just perfectly made for you, and I'm like, so Ahmed is just, well, I just ate, honey, I'm full, and Anisha's like, no, just try this meal. Just try this delicious meal that I made for you. And so Ahmed is just like, well, okay. So all of a sudden Ahmed is going and eating this meal, and immediately once she takes it out, I'm like, oh my god, that is the same thing that she liked from that other woman. And so the guy's eating the meal, and so like Anisha's like, how is it? How is it? How good does that taste? Like, man, you know what? I went and found some unique dish. Because like Ahmed is like, well, yeah, it's kind of different than normally you would do. Like it is kind of, it tastes better, and it's like, of course it does, honey. Of course it does. So Anisha goes and she is to mention that, yeah, she found this online on Instagram, and she ended up finding it out from Amanda Hornsby, and then Amanda is like, oh crap, like, you figured it out. You figured it out that I'm having an affair on you. And so Anisha is just, she's just like, why? Like, I gave up everything for you. I gave up my life for you. I gave up this, I gave up that. And so she's like, why? It's because I'm not, is it because she's white? Is it because like her bosom, her whatever? Like, what is it? And so Ahmed just says that it's just because she's not her. So it could have been anybody. He just wanted to have an affair with someone. And I'm like, you should have just easily just said something. Just come up with some kind of something. Like, made something up. But no, it's basically just like, I wanted to go out and cheat with any woman. That's not you. It's like, man, that is some horrible to tell Anisha. But then, right after this moment, all of a sudden, it seems that there is to be some kind of earthquake going on. Like, evidently they're to mention that there's like on the news, they're to just kind of mention like certain kind of problems and stuff going on. And so all of a sudden, like, the TV is starting to flicker off and on. And so like power is going out. And they're weirdly thinking, it's like, well, this doesn't seem like a storm because it's not raining. and so all of a sudden, like the parents are going to see if the kids are all right, and the kids are all right, and so all of a sudden they start to look outside and start to see that like certain houses are on fire and like horrible things are going on outside. And so Nisha just kind of turns to her husband, and like that's how they just kind of ended on that part. So I think that's where I'm going to end it on this episode. Oh my god, this took 50 minutes to talk about, and it's a 55-minute show. Good god, why did I take so long? But I was so enthralled about this show. So maybe I'll go and watch other episodes. So I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, everybody.